All right, the last group of hands or portable hand power tools that we're going to talk about are saws. And I've got a couple of them here that I want to show you and talk about. The first one that we'll talk about is what's known as the saber saw, or a lot of people call it the jigsaw. All right, looks like this. This is a battery powered unit. Um, probably the corded is going to be my favorite. I really like this Bosch, but how it works is you've got you pull the trigger and you've got a blade that reciprocates up and down. The blade cuts on the upstroke, and so you always want to have your finish or your good surface facing down, okay? And you're going to set the saw flat on the top surface, and basically you can use this because the blade is really narrow. This one's only about 1/4 of an inch wide. You can cut curves around really, just about any flat material, okay? Where this really makes sense is if you've got a large board, something that's really big and awkward, and you can't really work it on the bandsaw or scroll saw. So if the part is so large that it's so awkward you can't basically move the part into the saw, you find a saw that you can work and move into the part, okay? And that's where these portable saber saws work really well, okay? They do have some different features on the saw. You can change the blade. This is probably the slickest mechanism I've ever seen. You pop this open and then the bit just comes right out, okay? Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see what we're talking about here, all right? All right. So again, let me just kind of go over that again. You've got a lever right here. You pull that open, the bit comes free. A lot like the reciprocating saw, or the Sawzall, as it's kind of commonly called. Here's another type of a blade that I guess is less common. If you ever wanted to use one of these to cut straighter lines instead of curves, you could use this dog, okay? And so you can imagine that would cut material pretty quick. It's a little bit wider blade, so you're going to be able to cut a straighter line. All right. That's used a lot in cabinet making. Here's another a reciprocating saw. That's what this one is called, is a reciprocating saw. And again, you can take the bit or the blades out really quickly by just opening that lever there, putting your new blade in, and now you're ready to rock and roll. Okay, I really like the battery-powered reciprocating saws, but the problem is they just don't last very long. Okay, but most of the time when you're needing to use a reciprocating saw, you're not needing to make really long cuts. Okay, it seems like to me anyway, in my experience, having a battery-powered reciprocating saw has been a good thing. Okay, these are used mainly for demolition. You put a stud wall together, you realize that you got the door in the wrong spot, you need to cut the studs out. You can cut through wood, you can cut through metal. The blades are pretty cheap, and you can really get in there and make a correction really fast. Okay, just this last weekend we had a bad storm last fall, the derecho of 2020, and so we were using the Sawzall to basically tear apart some of the framing that had gotten damaged. And so Sawzalls are really nice, or reciprocating saws. One thing I've kind of learned just through using them is that they do have different technologies. Some of like the Milwaukees, the DeWalt, some of the higher end reciprocating saws will have kind of a shock absorbing handle, so it absorbs some of that jarring effect that when you're cutting on something and it's kind of jiggling your whole body. Those small things kind of add a lot of value. Okay. Another thing that's nice are these blade to change the blade mechanisms, and so these are good. Some of them are not so good. All right. You can also turn the saw backwards if you need to do that. Okay. that way. They have different types of blades. I typically will spend I've decided that buying cheap blades is probably not a good thing. All right, so in my older age, as I've gotten more experience, I tend to go toward the heavier duty, the wider, thicker blades. They have metal blades, they have wood blades. I've even heard of, and I've never used one, but I've even heard of diamond blades, where basically you have a steel blade that's been coated with industrial diamonds, and it's used for cutting cast iron pipes and different things. And so they've got a lot of different types of blades, different tooth sizes, metal cutting blades, you know, with real high tooth numbers, TPI, and so they're a really handy tool to have, especially if you're doing demolition type work. Okay, you'd want to have one on every construction job site. All right. The other type of saw that I would like to talk about is what's called the circular saw. Okay, so the circular saw is exactly what the name implies, is a saw. You have a circular blade and you pull the trigger and your blade rotates. Okay, there's a base on the saw. Again, the blade rotates in the upward direction. So again, you want your good side, the A side of your plywood or whatever you're cutting, facing down, all right? So that when that saw comes up, it tends to tear out where the saw blade pulls through the material, all right? So you want your good side, the side that you don't want to tear out, facing down. All right, but anyway, they've got different sizes. These are measured by diameter of saw blade. Okay, typically I want to say 7 1/4, 8 1/4 are your standard sizes of saw blades. This is a corded skill saw. I say skill saw. That's kind of the Skill is one of the early brands that really made this saw popular, and so commonly people call them skill saws, but circular saws is the correct name. So, but yeah, they don't make these saws equal either. I do like the corded brand or the corded types better, because anytime I've used circular saws, you tend to be making longer cuts, and the batteries, they always die before you're done cutting, okay? And so I do like the corded styles better. The other thing that I really look for in one of these saws is a lightweight, well-balanced saw, all right? The ones with the aluminum, I think most of them have aluminum bases, but I've got one at home. It's a Makita. It's got a really strong motor, but I don't know, you just pick it up and it just feels light, and it feels, it just feels good in your hand. And so there's something when you go to buy a skill saw or a circular saw to test them out, to hold them and find one that is lightweight that way, okay? The other thing too, they do have, for more heavier duty usage, my brother was a framer for many, many years, and he had what was called a worm drive saw. All right, so this is a direct drive. You've got your motor and it's directly connected to the blade. They also have worm drive saw where the motor is actually, it actually is turned 90 degrees, and then the arbor of the motor is connected to a worm gear, and that's what drives the saw. So that gearbox is filled with oil, so you have to make sure that it's filled with oil. But really, those saws are made because, you know, for framers who are using the saw every day, they're using it hard, they're abusing it, and they need something that's going to last a long time. And so those worm drive saws are really robust, and they're really strong, and they're also really heavy, and to me, they just feel awkward. But, you know, I don't use a saw every day like a framer would. They have different types of blades. Again, you measure the blade by diameter, but they have finished blades. This is a finished blade here. I don't know if you can see that, but there's 60 teeth on this blade. So they're small, they're close together. They produce a better finish that way. They make ripping blades where you've got much larger teeth and larger gullets for pulling out those long, gnarly those long gnarly chips. And so those work really well for ripping. The thing about a circular saw and the thing that makes them so valuable is they can be used for lots of different processes, okay? And when you're on the job site, really, you know, a guy doesn't have that many tools, and the circular saw can do a lot of things. It can rip boards, it can be used to cross-cut boards, take a speed square, hook that on the edge, and then run that right alongside of that speed square, using that speed square as a fence, and you can get very accurate crosscuts that, you know, that are perfectly square. You can use it to cut tails on rafters at specific angles. You can do, you can actually change by loosening this lever here. You can change the depth of your saw cut, your kerf, and so you can cut grooves. You can do rabbets with them. You can, I've even seen guys use these to notch out the, you know, a pocket on a stud, okay? And so sometimes some of the ways I've seen people use these saws probably wouldn't be kosher, you know, in a safety book, but you know, and when you're out there on the job site, sometimes you just got to make it work and get it done. And so a very versatile machine, and because it's a circular saw, the one big thing that you got to watch out for is kickback. All right, because again, remember that circular blade. Not only are we providing a force up toward the table, but or the base in this situation, but we're also providing forward force. And so if your wood pinches, or you know, you always hear about people having two sawhorses set up, and you got a board laying across the top, and a guy with a skill saw cutting that, and when you cut through that board, it kind of wants to fall. When it falls, it pinches, the kerf pinches the blade, and bam, it kicks your saw back. So you do have to be careful. You got to know what you're doing. Got to understand the physics of it. But boy, I tell you, they're a very, very useful machine. So in summary, there's lots of different types of saws. You know, I didn't even talk about them all. Saber saw, jigsaw, or saber saw or jigsaw. You got your reciprocating saw and your circular saw, and so when you're ready, if you want to use them, I usually keep them in this black cabinet right here, and so that's kind of where those are at. So let me know if you have questions. Otherwise, happy sawing.